The public is trained to look at the sky for incoming missiles. This is a strategic misdirection. The kinetic cost of a launch on warning posture is a high-visibility, last-resort liability. The primary vector of attack is not a bang, but systemic, engineered silence. Analysts at RUSI and CSIS confirm the new battle space is the ocean floor. Over 97% of global data and trillions in daily financial transactions travel through a finite number of undersea fiber optic cables. These are civilian infrastructure, largely unprotected, a systemic vulnerability of unprecedented scale. The secondary front is orbital, not physical destruction, but temporary satellite blinding using ground-based lasers. This is a low-cost, deniable method to sever GPS, cripple military communications, and disrupt high-frequency trading. No debris, no warhead, just a nation-state rendered deaf and blind. This protocol is designed to create a blind Leviathan, a modern state suddenly severed from its own global economic and military nervous system. A nation that cannot confirm its solvency or verify threats is systemically cornered. In this state of engineered paralysis, its most extreme asymmetric option is no longer a deterrent. It becomes a rational, mathematical last resort. The silence is the trigger. The motive is not ideology. It is solvency. A state functions like a corporation with a balance sheet. When its domestic liabilities, economic stagnation, civil unrest, political decay, exceed its capacity to pay, it becomes insolvent. Leadership is then presented with a zero-sum choice: internal collapse or external re-engineering of the strategic environment. The Russian Federation is the case study. According to CSIS analysis, the kinetic operation was preceded by mounting domestic liabilities and the escalating political cost of an unpopular, stagnant system. The war was a solvency event, a high-risk maneuver to consolidate power, cauterize internal dissent, and force a new economic reality. When conventional policy fails, a pivot to asymmetry becomes the only viable vector. This is the protocol for engineered weakness. The non-kinetic attacks cited in intelligence, like the tariff threats against BRICS nations, source number 1, are designed to degrade a target's conventional power. This forces a flight to asymmetry. The state's response is mathematically predictable. It must find new leverage or die. This is not a choice. It is a systemic function. Therefore, the ultimate risk is a launch on warning posture for economic survival. For a nuclear-armed state cornered by a solvency crisis, the kinetic cost of conflict becomes preferable to the certainty of internal disintegration. The use of its most extreme asymmetric option ceases to be an act of madness and becomes a rational, if catastrophic, move to prevent a domestic collapse. It is a business decision. The core equation of lethality has been broken. The kinetic cost of neutralizing a state's primary armor has collapsed into a rounding error. A Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, analysis presents the new balance sheet. A $5 million main battle tank, a systemic asset, is now a confirmed liability against a $500 first-person view drone. This is not a tactical advantage. It is a 10,000 to 1 cost asymmetry, and it fundamentally alters the calculus of state power. This economic inversion is what strategic analysts at CSIS term the democratization of violence. The high capital barrier to projecting lethal, state-level force has been effectively zeroed out. Military dominance, once the exclusive domain of nations with vast industrial bases, is rendered insolvent. The monopoly on sophisticated violence has been liquidated, available to anyone with access to a supply chain for consumer electronics. For a state subjected to a systemic solvency crisis via economic warfare, This new math is not an abstraction. It is a vector. When a symmetric conventional response is priced out of existence and your strategic assets can be attrited at a near zero cost, the game theory shifts. The ultimate asymmetric option, once a deterrent, is recalibrated. It ceases to be a weapon of last resort and becomes the only economically rational response to ensure survival. This is the blueprint for a launch-on-warning protocol triggered by financial attack, not incoming missiles. While the media focuses on headlines of regional instability, the mechanism you are not being shown is the strategic designation of gray zones. These are not zones of chaos, they are proxy laboratories. When the U.S. State Department issues a Level 4 do not travel warning for over 20 countries, this is not a public service announcement. It is the strategic clearing of a battle space, redacting civilian liabilities from future operational areas. Warnings regarding nations like South Africa or Canada are symptoms, field tests for systemic stress in developed economies, allowing observation of the preliminary stages of a solvency cascade. These gray zones function as live-fire testbeds for asymmetric economic warfare. A policy like the tariff threat against the BRICS bloc, as outlined in source number 1, is an act of economic strangulation. The target nation cannot respond symmetrically without escalating to a kinetic event it cannot win. Therefore, it must test alternate protocols in a low-risk environment. According to RUSI analysis, these proxy zones allow states to trial new supply chain routes, test financial decoupling mechanisms, and gauge the political fallout of non-compliance, all without triggering a direct launch-on-warning response from a superpower. The data from these laboratories is then used to engineer a systemic pivot. The discussion of an EU combined military force, source number 2, is a direct vector originating from this logic, a blueprint for a new security pact tested in the gray zone of European instability. Concurrently, the exploration of Bitcoin for central bank reserves, source number 4, is not a financial trend, it is a solvency protocol. It represents a flight to safety for assets outside the control of the architects of economic sanctions. These are not disparate events, they are coordinated rehearsals for a full-spectrum breakaway from the legacy system. The mathematical certainty is this. The gray zone is where the theoretical becomes operational. It is the staging ground where the kinetic cost of retaliation is calculated and mitigated before the first move is made on the primary board. The instability is not a bug. It is a feature, designed to mask the deployment of the systems that will define the next conflict. The laboratory phase is finite. Once the protocols for survival are validated, their deployment against the primary antagonist is not a risk, but a necessity. The launch-on-warning doctrine is not a strategy. It is a solvency protocol. Analysts at RUSI confirm that a state under severe economic duress cannot afford to absorb a first strike. It lacks the economic and industrial depth to retaliate after being hit. Its survival is therefore predicated on a single data point, the confirmation of an inbound attack. This is a mathematical tripwire, not a political decision. This is where the fog of digital war becomes the primary accelerant. A peer-state cyber attack does not need to detonate a warhead. It only needs to blind the command and control network. When radar, satellite, and subsurface sensor feeds are systematically severed, the commander is faced with a total information vacuum. The absence of data becomes the data. In this scenario, as outlined in CSIS Wargaming, the commander is forced to assume the worst-case vector. A decapitation strike is already in flight. To hesitate is to risk the complete liquidation of the nation's command structure and its retaliatory capability. The fear of being disarmed forces the launch. The kinetic cost becomes a rational expenditure to prevent total systemic collapse. This is the engineered dilemma. using a non-kinetic weapon, a cyber attack, to make the enemy's use of its most extreme kinetic option a logical necessity. The final stage before a solvency cascade turns kinetic is not the war itself, but the calibration shot. This is a strategic prerequisite, a limited, deniable, and devastatingly precise signal. It is designed to test the adversary's response protocols and demonstrate capability without triggering a launch-on warning state. When a state actor is cornered by economic strangulation, as documented in warnings regarding tariffs, source number 1, its strategic calculus shifts from prosperity to survival. The objective is no longer to win, but to impose an intolerable, asymmetric cost on the aggressor. Analysts at RUSI and CSIS have modeled this exact vector. An attribution impossible event serves a dual purpose. It creates massive economic disruption and seeds systemic distrust, while providing plausible deniability. The goal is to force the aggressor to recalculate the kinetic cost of their economic policy. It is a mathematical equation. If the cost of compliance, economic collapse, is higher than the risk of a limited, deniable strike, the strike becomes a rational action. This is the last off-ramp before overt conflict, a final, violent negotiation. The forecast is therefore a matter of protocol, not prediction. Within the next 12 months, expect a coordinated, non-kinetic shutdown of a Tier 1 logistical or data infrastructure node. The target set includes the Port of Long Beach, the data center clusters of Northern Virginia, or a major European financial clearinghouse. The event will last between 12 and 36 hours and be officially attributed to a cascading grid failure or a zero-day software anomaly. It will be neither. It will be a calibration shot.